Let me go over one of the most important concepts in patient education, which is reinforcement. And this is commonly what's lost or forgotten by the chiropractors is reinforcement. And really what happens is the patient signs on. Let's say the doctor's good, he gets the patient to prepay. And then typically what happens, the casual conversations set in. Next thing you know, there's no reinforcement. The patient's just coming in for an adjustment. And now the doctor's talking about the ball game, the kids, everything else. But for the reason the patient is paying to be there that day, reinforcement. We all need reinforcement. That's just a human nature. So you remember, if you look at the big picture, there's always pleasure, a focus. There should always be a singular focus for them to move toward. Typically, that's the number one test, and that's typically the motion test. In other words, it's singular with high priority amongst the other ones. Then there's the typical pain to move forward. That's the probability of ending up with a permanent problem to some degree. That's educated in with the science of the 3 phases of healing. So that's the narrow focus. That's the pain moving. Then there's always guidelines. There should always be periodic support. And that's with they should receive weekly email support. And those emails should always be about what you're doing, the science of the 3 phases of healing, the tests, the therapies. That's what they should always be. Those are the guidelines. They should be getting that at least once a week. And then during the visit, there should always be a component during that visit that reminds them of why they're there, why they're paying. In other words, it's not just joking about the ball game and high-fiving and okay, you have a good day. Unfortunately, that's what typically happens in most chiropractic offices. And I found it's really from lack of discipline. Basically, the doctors get tired of doing the same thing over and over. That's what I found. And they just started deviating to all kinds of other things just out of boredom. Not, that's why I found so many doctors deviate so much, but it's like Michael Jordan says, he's got people in that audience that have never seen him before that paid for that ticket, and they probably aren't going to see him again. So he had the discipline for each game to go all out because that was his mindset. Well, I found most chiropractors don't have that mindset. They just get bored real fast doing the same thing over and over. And that's why you're talking about the ball game next. And you're not even paying attention to the real reason they're paying you money. Because remember, they're not paying you money to buy a friend. They're not doing that. But that's typically what happens. So what should be happening on that individual visit? That's why we broke down the components of a visit on how to move a patient through a routine visit to give a 1 to 3 minute adjustment of high quality. We talked about that separately. But one of the things you always want to do is when you touch anything else, but clinically what's going on with that patient. That's like when I actually go to adjust the patient, I'll palpate them, whatever. If they're still talking about the ball game or something different, I will not start. I'll stop. And if I am doing something clinically, like palpating or getting ready to adjust something like that, and they say anything else, I'll stop. I am not going to allow them to talk about anything else but what I'm doing. Number one, it just decreases the value. They're talking about the ball game, whatever, and you're going crack, crack, crack. Yeah, he hit that home run, crack, crack. You just devalued the heck out of what you just did. Tremendously devalued it. So from the time you touch that patient to the time you're done, there should be no conversation except what you're finding. That's why I say when we do that, what we call that mini talk tell exam. Well, that happens on every visit. When prior to you adjusting them, you're going to put your hands on them and touch that patient. Well, when you do, you find that out. Is it tender here, fixed here, tender? And then you also say what you're finding. Oh, I see that's fixed here. That moves good here, good here. That moves somewhat good here. That's tight right there. That's tight. Is that painful right? Is that tender at all right there? See, it's always engaging the patient relative to what's going on during the actual time of the visit. And then I say, one of the best things you can do is when you finish. So you've reminded them of everything you're doing clinically, and that's why they're paying you. And that's why I say the best thing you can do when you finish is don't let that patient walk out, and don't you walk out. You finish their notes right in front of them. And typically it should only take about 8, 9, 10 seconds. It should literally be that. And you need to say it out loud. So whatever it is you found when you do the SOAP notes, subjective, objective. So you've already done the subjective prior to starting. Either you did it or they've done it. So now I finished the adjustment. I say, hold tight just a second. Now I'm going to say out loud because I want them to hear it. That creates reinforcement and focus of what we're doing. Wait just a second, Mary. So there was C5, there was fixation, C5, C6 on the right, tenderness, grade 2, tenderness at C5 on the right, and that was grade 1 tenderness, bilateral muscle tension, mild of the cervical erectors. And then we go down to the low back and the lumbar spine. We got L5 tender grade 1, and we have fixation at L5 S1 and a grade 2 fixation. And then we had bilateral muscle tension of the lumbar erector muscles, mild spasm. All right, Jerry, see, that's what they should have heard. So they should have heard when you're talking to them, that's reinforcement. When you finish, that's reinforcement. That's why they're paying you money and spending time. It should not be, hi, Mary, how you doing? How you doing today? Okay, fill that out. And then next thing you know, you're talking about everything else except while they're there. And unfortunately, I see that all the time. And in my opinion, it's from the doctor. Number one, if he doesn't even know, if he's not even trained how to run a business, he'll do stupid stuff like that. Number two is just boredom and lack of discipline. Now you just are okay with being friendly with the patient and talking about the ball game or whatever, because you'd rather do that than talk about C5 being tender for the 20th time that day. That's why. But he's paying for that day. So that's just a side note on the number one focus, how to keep that patient focused on what you're doing. So remember, there's many moving parts. There's the care for them moving forward. That should be a singular third-party objective. There's the pain, natural pain of taught in, of permanency. And then should be the reminders, which are like the guardrails. Once a week, they should be getting a reminder of something relative one of 3 topics: the 3 phases of healing, the bowel markers, or the therapy. Something about each of those. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be personalized to them. It just be talking about, hey, this is a component of the 3 phases of healing. This is a common test we find. This is what it means. This is the therapies we do, or this is a therapy we use in the office, and this is how it fits into the 3 phases of healing. These are some of the common findings that we'll use while we use it, how we use it, and why we use it. Just really simple stuff like that. A component of the 3 phases of healing, the most common test, and the therapies you do. Something said about everyone. They should be getting that weekly. So it's just reinforcement. And of course, that's what the re-exam is. It's reinforcement. But there's no way you want to go from a report of findings to the re-exam and not say anything in between. You will be losing patients left and right. And by the way, that's one of the best, I always say the single best, if you were to put on a hierarchy, what's the single best patient retention? Number 1 is prepays, knowing how to get the patient prepaid. What's number 2? The new patient orientation, because that's where it all comes together. The big picture's laid out and all the dots are combined. It's the second most important topic you can do for patient education is our, what we call our new patient orientation. And that's based on the science of the 3 phases of healing, et cetera. And then what's the third best thing you can do is the daily objective talks. And the fourth thing, the emails, and the fifth is the re-exam. That's the reinforcement they should be getting. That's the priority of the reinforcement. That's how you'll keep patients